How's it going, my friend? It's Danny here from projectmanaverse.com, real world technical project managers for beginners. And today I'm going to give you 5 pro tips when gathering and writing your project requirements. I'm going to tell you what these requirements are, why you should know about this, why it's important, and I'll give you the pro tips. So let's jump straight in with the video. First of all, what are project requirements? Remember, this is about technical projects, so I'm talking from a technical IT project perspective. So in essence, project requirements describe in a very detailed way what your project is delivering. It's like a blueprint to know exactly what to build. When I say build, I mean code or develop. They need to be very, very detailed. This is your ingredients to build the right thing ultimately for your project and your delivery. You can use an analogy of baking a cake, for example. The ingredients are like the project requirements. You need to know exactly what the ingredients are, where they should come from, and exactly how much of them to use, and even go into how long you should cook them for to the precise minute. Those are very detailed requirements for building a cake. It's kind of like that, but you're doing it for actually developing and building something in the IT world. So that's what requirements are, and they can come from various areas in the organization or the organization you're working for. The end customer will definitely have some requirements. The IT folk that actually build the thing will have some technical requirements in their head that we need to think about, because it will need to fit into the current landscape of that organization, the current IT landscape. Some of the support teams might have requirements in terms of when the thing should be available. They call them non-functional requirements, things that aren't necessarily to do with the functionality of the system or application that you're building, more about things like how often it can be available and what it looks like, that kind of stuff. So that's what requirements are. And the number of requirements you have on a project varies from project to project. It depends what you're doing. I've been on a project where we've had thousands of requirements, and I've been on a project where we've had about 10 requirements. If, for example, you're upgrading an application or a system that's already there and being used by the business, and you're just upgrading it to the next version, you might have some very simple requirements, and that is that the application still works as it does today. That's your big high-level requirement, and you're not really bothered about anything else. If you're building something from scratch, it's a brand new application that no one's ever going to have used before, and it's a brand new and exciting, then you're going to have to start from scratch and build your requirements from the ground up. That's going to be a lot more involved. So that's what requirements are. Why should you care about requirements as a project manager? Various reasons. Number one, without a good set of requirements, it's difficult to get very clear and very focused about what you're building. It's hard to do that without a good set of requirements. Otherwise, things are just a little bit too vague. You're moving along, you're very busy, but you might not have the direction you need to be able to ensure the success and a really good delivery, and to ensure that you've built what is really, really required. So it's difficult to get clarity on where you're going, and that can lead to morale issues and all that kind of stuff. So as a project manager, remember, you want to bring order from chaos, and having a good set of requirements does that. Also, without a good set of requirements, it's very difficult to plan. If you don't know exactly what you're building, it's difficult to estimate how long it's going to take and what resources you'll need. So it's difficult to get a good project plan together without a good set of requirements. Also, you're very much at risk of building the wrong thing. So if you don't have the right set of requirements or detailed enough requirements, you could build something and it's not quite what the customer wanted because the requirements weren't specific enough. You could build the wrong thing. That's very dangerous. And also, you just leave yourself exposed in general to things like scope creep if you don't have a good set of requirements that have been signed off by the business and the various areas of the organization that you can go back to. Because if you don't do that and you don't have a specific thing you're building, people can come along and say, oh, can you just add this feature or just do this? And you're being pulled into the directions, and the what you're delivering is building up and piling up. We call it scope creep, and the scope keeps increasing and they're asking for different things. If you don't have a clear set of requirements that have been signed off, you're in danger of that happening. It can be very distracting, it can waste a lot of time and can expose you. So that's why it's important that you have a good set of requirements as a project manager. So let's move on to the interesting bit. Let's go on to the the pro tips, my 5 pro tips for writing requirements. Number 1, when you write your requirements, you want to be very clear and concise, and they should be unambiguous. So anyone that picks up a requirement, even if they are not a specialist in the area that you're building in, should be able to understand them. They should not be open to interpretation. You want to be as clear as possible. Okay, that is easier said than done, I know. So it helps to get different perspectives to review the requirements. If you've got a BA to write them, that's great, because they'll have experience in doing this the right way. But you want to review them with your team to make sure that everyone understands them, because everyone has a different perspective when they read something. We don't read it all in the same way. So it's good to review them as a group to make sure that they're very clear. That's tip number 1. Tip number 2 is to be as specific as possible and to avoid being vague. And the easiest way to be specific is use a number, for example. Use a number if you can. If you're doing measurements, use your actual numbers and the units as well. So you can't, there's no ambiguity in terms of what you're talking about. So use numbers if you can. If, for example, let's give an example in the real world, you're giving requirements for painting a house, and you say, I want the paint to be red. That's fairly specific, but it's not specific enough. If you can actually give a code for the paint you want, that is a very specific requirement, and that can't be misinterpreted unless you're in another part of the world and they have different codes or whatever. But I think you get what I'm talking about. If you can be specific as possible, that will help you. And if you can use numbers and measurements, that is even better. So that's pro tip number 2, be specific. Tip number 3 is to prioritize your requirements. So you can't always get all the requirements delivered that you want. It's not always possible, or what that the business wants. That is not always possible. So what you need to do is start to prioritize them. So say which ones you really, really want, and which ones that the second priority we should have. Sometimes we do it in what's called a MOSCO acronym. So you have your must-haves first of all, and you have your should-haves, and then you have your could-haves and your would-haves. So start with the absolute must non-negotiables. Those are the most important things. Then you go into your should-haves, and then you go into your could-haves. So as long as you deliver your must-haves, the project will succeed. If you can get your should-haves in there as well, that's going to deliver more benefit in the project. And the could-haves are sort of nice-to-haves. We like to say nice-to-have in the industry. So that's my pro tip number 3, prioritize them. So when you come to delivering it, whether it's your engineers or whoever's going to be building the thing for you, they know exactly what the critical requirements are and where to start with. That's tip number 3. Tip number 4 is to make the requirements traceable. When I say traceable, you want to know where the requirement actually came from, who actually gave the requirement, and if you can get some governance behind it ultimately or down the line in terms of when that requirement was signed off and agreed, even better. But you want to know where that requirement came from, what department did it come from, and who was the person that gave the requirement. That will help you later down the line, because days can feel like weeks on a project, and you're 6 months into a project, you look at your requirements and you think, where the hell did that requirement come from? Why are we doing that? And you start to second guess yourself and you think, right, do we really need that? It seems on the surface that you don't need this requirement, so you de-scope it, and it turns out it was actually really important for various reasons, but you can't go back and check for that person, so you must make sure it's traceable back to the source. Okay, my last pro tip before wrapping up the video is make them measurable and testable. So once you have a requirement, in the project management world, every requirement should be testable and should be tested in your testing phase. So you can going back to the traceability point, you can trace your requirement to the source, and you can trace it back to a test as well. So you know that all your requirements have been delivered and tested and you haven't missed anything. That's really critical. So that's my pro tip number 5 for you. Okay, so that was a video. So requirements, I'll give you a very brief wrap up and summary, then we'll call it a day. So requirements are like the detailed description of what your project is delivering, what you're actually building. It's very important, because without requirements, it's hard to get very clear on the vision of the project and the scope and exactly what you're building. And by extension, that makes it very hard to plan. you leave yourself exposed to scope creep if you don't have a good set of requirements, and ultimately you could deliver the wrong thing, or it could not meet the customer's expectation and they will not be satisfied. So it's very important you get them right. Your pro tips, let's recap on this very quickly. Number one, be very clear and unambiguous when you're writing your requirements. Be specific, use numbers and units if possible. Number three was, what was number three? Prioritize your requirements, what you must haves, what you should haves, and what you could haves. Number four, make sure they're traceable back to the source, who gave that requirement. And then number five, make sure they are testable and you can test the requirement in your testing phase to prove that it has been delivered. That's the video, guys. Until the next time, please take care.